We move now to the manhunt for those two suspects in the Paris terror attack. French police closing in on a wooded area about 40 miles northeast of the city. They're searching for the two brothers accused of carrying out yesterday's shooting rampage at a Paris satirical newspaper that left 12 people dead. The police search is taking place near a gas station where two men fitting the suspects' descriptions are accused of stealing food and gas. The suspect's alleged accomplice turned himself in yesterday. Meanwhile, it's a day of mourning in Paris.
It's me, Charlie. I am Charlie. Ich bin Charlie, wherever you are in the world. This is a tragic event. And I'm going to march on Saturday to show my defiance to murderers and evil fundamentalists.
The bells tolled at Notre Dame Cathedral as the country observed a moment of silence for the victims. The surviving members of that satirical magazine, including some of the wounded, declared today they will publish their magazine next week on schedule. And joining us now, Dr. Richard PINEDA, the director for the Sam Donaldson Center for Communication Studies at UTEP. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Maria.
So, you know, this incident has really brought up a lot of this conversation about free speech. Bill Maher yesterday on Jimmy Kimmel basically saying that the world has to deal with the problem of extremist Muslims and that we have to sort of deal with this at a macro level. What do you think about that?
Well, you know, I think that the tragedy that we saw unfold in Paris yesterday is indicative of a serious crisis when it comes to fundamentalist terrorism of all stripes. But I think what we saw yesterday was not a reaction to the expression of the magazine, but I think part of a much more complicated, cultivated strategy to try to create a division in civil society about who and what is respected. And I think the problem with the way that we've talked about it, I think even is really reductive. The situation that's unfolding is one that I think is creating space for people who are on the extreme opposite side of Muslim fundamentalism in places like Europe to rally the support against it and to try to create essentially a movement against that fundamentalism. To a certain extent, groups like ISIS, groups like Al-Qaeda use opportunities like this to actually foment their own support and get people on track with their own beliefs. And so in some ways, I think it's much more complicated than saying this is just a conversation about expression. I mean, I think that in any given civil society, you're always going to have conversations about what's acceptable and what's not. I think that conversation has to happen. I think it continues to happen after an attack like this, and I think that we have to be somewhat careful to separate out the circumstances of this particular attack and not paint the Muslim community as a whole as dangerous or evil as the package references.
Mm-hmm. Now, this isn't about expression in and of itself, but I think expression is a big part of it. Obviously, the FBI crediting that cyber attack on Sony, on North Korea because of the interview. I mean, we're seeing these different incidences around the world where freedom of expression, some would say, is being threatened.
Well, I think that the thing about even the circumstance with the Charlie Hebdo magazine in Paris and even with the interview, they all sort of point to why terrorism never works. That is that people's reaction to this isn't to sort of cower and say we're not going to do these things. In fact, it seems like the reaction to that, especially in editorial cartoons today, the response from people who consider themselves colleagues to these writers and cartoonists has been very vocal about supporting the people whose lives were lost. So I think in some ways this idea of threats to freedom of expression, I think there's always a risk, and it doesn't downplay the tragedy of what we saw in Paris, but I think at the same time the notion of expression is not limited. I mean, it's not going to be limited, and in fact, in every occasion, I mean, even notably in the United States post 9/11, the circumstances in which people have taken to the airwaves or taken to protest continue. So in some ways, I think that these attacks, always tragic, always undermined, I think, the role that terrorists attempt to use them for.
Okay. And I know our Jerry Nahada working on a story about this on ABC 7 at 10. He'll speak with you more extensively. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. PINEDA.
You're very welcome. It's always good to see you.
Always insightful. Thank you so much.